team. All right, so let's dig into what we're doing today. So we're going to be looking at poetry. Let me make this a little bigger for you. Sorry. And your homework is you're going to write your own poem. That might make you feel really excited. That might make you feel like, oh, God. That's okay. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to just go with the basics. This is not going to be a really complicated thing. It's just something we want to try. Okay? So that's what we're doing today. We're going to go over basics. We're going to go over examples. And then we're going to give you some time to work on your poem. So a couple of basics that we need to talk about. So a lot of people hate poetry because they think poems are supposed to be these long, crazy, complicated things that you don't know what they're talking about. No, it doesn't have to be like that. So first of all, poetry doesn't even have to rhyme. And we're actually going to read some poems that don't rhyme. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be about something really, really simple. One of my favorite poems is just about a vase of flowers. Very simple, okay? Another thing is that it can follow specific structures like rhyme or how many syllables, that's the sounds you have in a line, or a combination of those two things. And when poems do that, those structures can give an extra layer of meaning to the poem. And that's because they make the author emphasize different things, or they make them choose their wording very carefully so that it can rhyme or so that it can fit the structure. And sometimes that means that the words they choose or their rhyme can bring out an extra layer of meaning or a double meaning in a word. The other thing to keep in mind is that poems don't have to be a big, long thing. We often think of poetry as really long and hard to keep track of, and it's complicated, and it uses all these words that we don't know. Not true. One of my very, very favorite poems is 9 lines long, and at most, each line has 5 words. And it's really, really simple words like rain, grass, whatever. I'll share it with you sometime, but it doesn't have to be a big, long, complicated thing. So if that's what you think poetry might be, it's not like that. Okay, so Charlie shared a poem with us in his reading, which is why we're talking about poetry today. And his poem did have a specific structure, but it did not rhyme. So let's take a second to actually look at the poem that he shared with us. So Charlie shares this poem, and this is the beginning of it, but it's not the whole thing. So it says, once on a blank piece of paper, and he describes the paper. Okay, so once on a blank piece of paper with blank colored lines. And you can see he does that again here. So once on a piece of yellow paper with green lines, once on a piece of white paper with blue lines, and it does that in the next one too. And he continues to talk about his mom. So his mother hung it on the kitchen door and read it to his aunts. His mother never hung it on the kitchen door because of the new paint. And then immediately after his mom, he always talks about Father Tracy and what's going on with him that year. And then at the end of each group of lines, that's called a stanza, he usually talks about the girl around the corner and what's going on with her. So this has a very specific structure, but it doesn't rhyme. So poem doesn't rhyme with dog, about doesn't rhyme with star, ants doesn't rhyme with zoo, right? So that's not something that you have to have. So another example that we want to look at is the song Ivy by Frank Ocean, because it has a different structure. So each verse ends with the same line. The feeling still deep down is good. But the verses are different, right? Some poems rhyme, like Formation by Beyonce, right? So these aren't perfect rhymes, but they're pretty close, right? So mesh, fresh, dress, and necklace. Because when we say necklace, it sounds like that. It doesn't actually sound like lace, right? So you have all these different ways that you can do a poem. You can do the one Charlie showed us that just has a structure. You can do Frank Ocean's, where one line is the same all the time. You can do like Beyonce, where there are actually rhymes. And we find that a lot in rap and hip hop as well. And now you're going to write your own poem. So keeping in line our guidelines, it can have a structure, but it doesn't need to. It can have a rhyme, but it doesn't need to. And it can be short, it can be long, it can use fancy language, it can use simple language. It really is, you have a lot of freedom here. But there's a couple of things I want to talk about before you go ahead and write. The first thing is that you need to know that myself, Miss Townsend, and Miss Jimenez are mandated reporters. So that means if you write about hurting yourself, being hurt by other people, or hurting other people in any way, not just violence, we're also talking about sexual assault, kind of stuff like that, stuff that might happen at home. So we have to report it or we will lose our jobs. There is a law. So what will happen is if you share something like that, we have to tell Ms. McMillan and then we have to call ACS. Okay? So I want you to think really, really carefully. If something like that has happened in your life and it is significant to you and you want to write about it, I need you to know that I cannot make an exception. I will be calling ACS. That is what I am required to do by law, and I'm not going to break the law. All right? I love you. I'm not going to break the law for you. Okay? So if I were you, I would choose not to share that for my assignment. I might write that poem, but that is not the one that I would turn in for my assignment. Okay, so for your poem, you can do whatever you want in terms of rhyme and structure. It can have rhymes, it cannot have rhymes. It can have structure, it doesn't need to have structure, whatever. We are going to give you a length minimum because we don't want you to just hand us like 5 words and tell us that's a poem. So it needs to be at least 10 lines long. Okay, 10 lines long. And you can write about pretty much anything, again, keeping in mind, if you write about hurting yourself or other people or being hurt, we are going to call ACS. So if you're nervous about that, don't write about it, okay? If you're kind of feeling like, I don't know really where to start, here are some common ideas for poetry. You might write about love, and not just romantic love. You could write about, the love that you have for a sibling or an adult in your life. You could write about romantic love, that first time you have a crush or get butterfly feelings, or the first time you go on a date, first time you're talking to somebody, right? You could write about friendship. Maybe there's been, maybe you and your best friend like had a really big fight and that was really impactful for your relationship, or maybe they're always there to support you, or maybe both. You could write about freedom. You could write about how you feel about yourself. You could write about what you see when you're walking around the city. There's all kinds of options of things that you can talk about. So it's really up to you. If you're still feeling stuck, give it a minute. You don't have to start writing something right away. Just give your brain a second to kind of kick into gear. And if you're really, really, really having trouble, then let me or Miss Townsend or Miss Jimenez know. Okay.